knowledge of this. Again, I suspend judgment, I haven't got a clue. I mean, would it have been in their ideology? Well, it's totally and utterly anti-Islamic. This is not, Islam does not permit mass killing of innocents with plague biowarfare. I mean, it's just off the scale of not acceptable. So we're talking some pseudo-Islamic nutters. Could the most extreme jihadi types that think, you know, violence is the way to go have dreamt this up? I don't believe so, because the Muslims I've always met and the ones I've taught, and I've taught at the Muslim College in London, I mean, I have a deep love and affection for Islam's higher philosophical forms. I can't see this as coming from any Islamic scientist. No. But, you know, it's always possible. So there might be some extremists who think, I know what we'll do, we'll make it look as if it's Israel, and then we'll, you know, be able to, like, reap the whirlwind, because everyone will blame Israel, but actually it was us, ha ha ha. I mean, there are probably some extremist Islamic, you know, anti-Jewish activists that would love to get their hands on this kind of thing. So some very extreme, dangerous terrorist groups. I've never met such people, but God forbid. But you know, and I find it hard to believe they could ever justify such a thing on Islam. Who else could it have been? Well, you know, you can think it through for yourself, but those are the main types of possible explanations I can come up with. One thing I don't think this is anything to do with European states. This isn't the EU. There's just no way that we would do France or any, you know, bona fide government that has a sort of social welfare system for its people, a social ethics program, which is most European Union states. This is not something that we would even think of for 1 second. What we must do is try and find the solution. So the philosophical implications of these hypotheses, you know, there are others, but I'm not going to go into the whole thing. I'm writing an article about it, a paper, which I don't know who will publish it, but I'll share it with people. It'll take about a week to finish, so if you want the written version of this talk, I think the question is then we have to work on the statistics. So we need to talk to experts in epidemiology to work out what is the likelihood of the probability of this or that cause. You know, and if it's the purely natural cause, which is number one, then, as I say, why hasn't it happened before? One explanation for that I've come across is that we're now moving into ecological niches that humans have not been into before, and so we're encountering much rarer kinds of bugs and viruses that have lain dormant in bat caves for millennia now are suddenly, you know, coming out. I'm not convinced by that argument, because our ancestors got pretty much everywhere already, and in very early times we used to live in caves and so on. So, you know, I'm weighing the arguments, and my job simply as a philosopher is to think through this logically, because it is important, right? I want to say the other implication of this chaos we're in now is, in a post-9/11 world and a post-Brexit world, we're living in a world, as I've said before in my talks, where the shortage is truth. We don't have a system in place to guarantee that truth will be spoken. I mean, I can say to you everything I'm saying now is the truth. Obviously, it is. When I don't know something, I will say I don't know, when I'm kind of half sure. I mean, my job as a philosopher is to find the ultimate truth. Well, we have to kind of get there on the relative truths, and telling the truth is therefore absolutely, it's my métier. And I once, you know, had a dispute with a builder who said some untrue things, and, you know, I explained to him that as a philosopher it's as important to me to build things truthfully, brick by brick, as a builder does. When you lay the bottom course of bricks, I've done a bit of building in my time, when you build a wall, you have to make absolutely sure that each row of bricks you put in is absolutely square and straight, and because if it's slightly off, as it goes up, the whole wall becomes skew-whiff. Well, it's the same with philosophical work. You have to be as accurate as possible in constructing truth from the base up. So of these 4 or 5 logical possibilities I've presented here, as of now, I don't know which is the truth, and I'm being honest with you. You know, one of my favourite philosophers is Descartes. Descartes, who lived not far from here in France, said all true philosophy starts with doubt. I doubt any of these theories, actually, at the present time. I don't see enough evidence for any of them. But I think one of them must be true. And I'm looking forward to, in the coming weeks, you know, if I survive, to finding out. But we're living in a world where I don't trust what the BBC says, or CNN, or you know, the New York Times. I mean, some of what they say, some of the research, can be useful, and it can help to the congregation of truth. But too many people in the media, I think, are too guilty of too many lies over the last 10, 20 years. I think since 9/11, to me, that was the big wake-up moment for me. Up until that point, I'd always kind of believed what the government said. I was a middle-of-the-road, left-centre-leaning Tony Blair supporter, living in London, working in Parliament, setting up a peace institute at the University of London, and, you know, believing that on the whole, governments tell the truth. And initially, over 9/11, I thought, you know, oh well, it's Al-Qaeda, and I kind of felt that. But as the years went past, and I met people that showed me the evidence, and I was gradually shown that the official story can't be true, I realised, with a kind of growing sense of dread, actually, that we have been lied to. And like Stephen Ray Griffin and David Ray Griffin and many others, I came to the conclusion that the official narrative is not sound. I therefore did a lot of research on it. I wrote a book which has just been published, a 2-volume history of 9/11, going into the philosophical and historical implications of that, because they've still not been taken on board by average people, and certainly not by academics. My colleagues in the historical profession have completely ignored the events of 9/11. Very few historians have written about it. And that to me is a conspiratorial silence, which I cannot understand why, because it's the single most important event at the birth of our century. It defined America's foreign policy and Britain's in the Middle East, which is go out and bash Muslims, you know. It made us unthinkingly supportive of Israel, giving them huge amounts of military equipment as our allies, even though there is no actual diplomatic treaty between Israel and the US, or Israel and the UK. I mean, and yet one gives them, you know, endless amounts of weaponry. So all this made me think, well, hang on, what if that narrative's not true? What if, you know, is there some other explanation behind 9/11? And then I did my research, published it recently. It's the first in-depth historical study of the events of 9/11 and their implications. And I suspend judgment. I run through the hypotheses for that, just as I've done today on coronavirus. And I haven't been able to say which is true. One lives in a state of doubt. This is the problem with Descartes and the Descartian approach to philosophy, but it just has to be endured. I'm in a state of perpetual doubt over 9/11 and also now over the coronavirus thing. What I am arguing is for an International Historical Commission of Inquiry into 9/11, which I'm launching later this year. And if anyone's interested in that, you know, get in touch. It's for professional historians, but others with information and ideas are welcome to participate as well. And it will be held here in France on 9/11 in this year, 2020, if we survive. I mean, you know, in my worst kind of, I'm not going to go into my worst nightmares. That can wait for another time. My worst nightmares is we won't survive, and we won't be able to even launch that commission. So we're all going to die off with no truth in sight. I mean, as a historian, lack of truth is the most scary. It's like a nightmare, you know. I think hell would be, for me, living in a world where there's no truth, where there's no sources, where you can never find out facts, where every book you read tells you a different story, and that would be hell for a historian, because we like to think that there's a narrative that can be constructed, that things happened in a sequence, some kind of logical order was there, some causal connection happened. And hell would be, no, that all breaks down, everything is totally random, chaotic, meaningless, and without any, full of sound and fury, but with no meaning. Which is why, in a sense, in the comparison of the different hypotheses about coronavirus, although it's an accident of nature is appealing in that it denies human agency, it's also disappointing in that it means that vast injury, pain, suffering and illness can happen to humanity totally randomly from just a few bats in a cave, which is a bit of a blow to schools of philosophy of history that say things happen because of deep and meaningful reasons, and because there's a God, or there's sort of some overarching value to human life and so on. This is a bit, if it turns out it's purely a natural phenomenon, this is a bit like the earthquake in Lisbon, which shocked the Enlightenment, 18th century epoch, and Voltaire, and made a lot of people give up their faith in God, because I think 60,000 people died in Lisbon in the space of a day. There was a huge earthquake, there was tsunamis, and they said, well, no, there can't be a God if that happens. Well, I hope that's not our coronavirus moment for the 21st century, because I'm a bit old-fashioned and romantic. I want to save some possibility, like Descartes himself, of there is a reason, a meaning, an explanation to life. There is a spiritual explanatory plane. There is a goodness at the heart of all this. It's not just random nature in the Darwinian sense of competition and struggle for survival. So I will be, in a sense, disappointed. On the other hand, the thought that it could have been, human agency creating this and unleashing it is again horrendous. So I live in a state of suspended judgment. But to me, it was not only 9/11 that started this whole culture which makes lying possible in politics. It's also Brexit, and as you know, I've spoken out loud and clear for many months, many moons, against Brexit, because to me, Brexit is another clear case of lying becoming established in the heartland of our political culture in Britain, which is a country I know and love. I'm a British citizen, and my children are British, and it's my home. My parents are British, and I went to school there and university and so on. And yet what I watched in horror is this culture of lies and dissimulation and deceit, deliberate deceit, taking power. And it's now taken over the Conservative Party, and it's now running the country in the form of Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson and their cronies, none of whom know what truth is if it hit them in the face. They have proved themselves time and time again to be mendacious, and not just speaking specific untruths, but their whole character and personality. And I blame also Theresa May. She was the start of this. Her fanatical imposition of Brexit against law, against reason, against the Constitution, and against the unwritten law whereby England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland kind of exist in amity in this thing called the United Kingdom. That broke down the minute Theresa May said, we're going to implement a Brexit, come what may. There's no negotiation, no going back. That's it. The minute that decision was taken, and the BBC backed it up, that was the breakdown of truth and trust in our country. That's why I was so at pains, and still am, to discover why the BBC backed that decision by Theresa May, and who in the BBC committees that govern policy acceded to that, which is why I wrote to Sir David Clementi and asked for the clarification at that point, and was told that you're not entitled to that. It's not coming within freedom of information. Well, I don't agree. I think it should. It's such an important policy decision that it should be in the public domain. Those kind of fundamental policy decisions in our national broadcaster, which I think then shaped the entire debate and made Brexit a done deal, and that's what we're now having. Well, and lo and behold, now we have coronavirus. So friends of mine, British friends, say, well, no, Thomas, Brexit has nothing to do with coronavirus. I fundamentally disagree. It has everything to do with it, because it's created the climate of lies in the face of all reason, right? Because anyone with a brain could see Brexit is going to destroy our country from within. It's going to create vast problems, economic, social, you name it. And yet to pursue that, it's as harmful, in my view, as self-seeding coronavirus into the population. I mean, obviously nobody in their right mind would do that, and yet whoever's done it, if it is a deliberate thing, whoever's done that is as evil and Machiavellian as I believe the people are behind Brexit. At the top elite levels, I believe a cabal came together, seized control of Theresa May and her cronies and her husband, probably pressured them and blackmailed them, and also the Queen was pressured and blackmailed into, no, Brexit is going ahead, whatever you do. Well, I think it's the same. I mean, okay, hypothesis, part of hypothesis 5 is that it's the same crew that might be behind the coronavirus stuff as their latest, let's do another thing to destroy the planet. We've destroyed Britain. I mean, it's going to take a while to rumble through, but it's gone now. It's going to fall apart. And I tell you what, why don't we now attack China? Anyway, I suspend judgment. I'm just thinking aloud here. It's my duty as a philosopher to think aloud. I don't see enough philosophers joining in the conversation. Feel free to think aloud alongside me. I find that Johnson's response to Brexit, to the coronavirus, which I watched his speech the other day, and many of my friends in Britain are utterly appalled by his herd immunity project. It seems to be based on fake science. As Rory Stewart points out, it's based on, creating a sort of, let's get this over with during the hot months of summer. Let's not delay this till the winter because more people will die. Let's get the cull underway. It's just totally false thinking, in my opinion, and very, very unethical. That's what you expect from mathematical modelers. I lived through this. It's a horrible deja vu to the treatment of the mad cow disease that happened in Britain when I was living in Welshpool area in Fordham. And the government, because of mathematical modelers at Imperial College, started mass culling animals and refusing to vaccinate. They started killing them in the millions. Millions of sheep, cows were stuck on bonfires and killed because the government couldn't be bothered to vaccinate them. This was an utter crime against life, against all ethics, in my opinion. And I set up a campaign group protesting it to absolutely no avail. You see, once the government of the day, that was under Tony Blair, it gets in the grip of the scientists, and they present this is the done deal, this is how we deal with it. No logic enters in. There's no sort of arguing with that closed system of scientific veracity. And that's what I fear is happening again. So the policy of Britain will be dictated by a small little cabal of mathematical modelers who've said this has to be the way it's done and we have to get this coursing through the population. Well, it's an experiment. Every other country is doing isolation and shutting restaurants, bars, cinemas, football matches and so on, in order to contain it, as has been done in China. And as Rory Stewart said, that seems to work. So, but to me, the fact that Boris Johnson could even for one second think of the, let's kill off a few million hypothesis, shows the lack of intelligence of the man, and also the lack of morality. But then what do you expect from a guy that's pushed Brexit, down British people on a basis of lies, misinformation and skullduggery, and who is not even British? In my opinion, he's an American citizen. He should be stripped of British citizenship. He has no understanding of what Britain is about and our sense of fair play and decency and honour. The man is a complete petty criminal in terms of his morality. So mass culling through coronavirus it's a Johnson type of response. But I'm not able to be that callous. I have to think these things through intellectually and logically in the fullness of the range of possibilities. And so it seems to me that Britain should be following Denmark and other things and shutting down these public gatherings, trying to minimise the outbreak as much as possible in the coming weeks and months. I don't want to get it, do you? And pray in the meantime that we come up with a vaccine, that someone in Israel or China, I mean, they're saying they might have it ready by April. We need to put huge resources into coming up with a vaccine, and that we can go in self-isolation until the vaccine comes out. It should be then made available free on the NHS and throughout the world. One of the things I think this scary situation shows is that we need the equivalent of an NHS in all countries. We need an international healing service. I believe the NHS should be renamed the National Healing Service, not the National Health Service. And I believe it should be equipped and empowered to investigate alternative healing methods, homeopathy, these kind of things. Not just wedded to a purely, strictly materialist, a narrow band of allopathic responses to illnesses. I'd be interested if there's any homeopathic cures for this particular virus, and if any advanced homeopaths around the world are working on that. So I'm speaking on behalf of the World Intellectual Forum because I'm coordinator for Europe, and we have a duty to think this thing through. It's the biggest crisis facing the world planet for as long as I remember. I think the crisis has many dimensions. It's the shortage of truth, which leads to a shortage of ethics. It leads then to a climate in which we don't know who might be behind this outbreak. Many people I read and hear from say this is a conspiracy by a government, this is country X or Y. Chinese military officials are getting up and saying this is an American attack on China. That's extremely dangerous because if it turns out it was, China's will feel at total liberty to do the same back. And we enter a scary world of biowarfare by secret skullduggery, and other people are alleging that. But, of course, we don't know who to believe. Other scientist types are saying, no, this is all just purely leapt from the bats, and anyone that says otherwise is crazy. But do we believe them? I mean, those are the kind of voices that shut down conversation about 9/11 and calls anyone that thinks outside the box a conspiracy theorist. Well, I'm neither a conspiracy theorist nor a shutter down of the conversation. I'm a philosopher of history and an academic, who's trained to keep the conversation going in all dimensions. And on behalf of the World Intellectual Forum, one of our board members, a great man actually, Professor Glenn T. Martin of Radford College in Virginia, has written a very fine essay calling attention to the anomalies in the causes behind this outbreak and pointing to the possibility that it might be artificially engineered. He quotes the work of Francis Boyle, professor of human rights, who's had a lot to do with the drafting of the bioweapons treaty that exists. Francis Boyle has some quite strong views on Israel and Palestine. I don't concur 100% with what he says, but he does seem to know what he's saying in relation to bio-warfare. And so my friend Professor Glenn Martin says he should be listened to. Well, I think he should be, as well as a number of other people have come out and said this is a bioweapons attack. They all need to be listened to and heard and researched. But on the other hand, critically and with a scepticism, it just because X, Y, Z says such and such is the case, it's not enough intellectually to give assent. We have to be absolutely certain. This is so important that we get this right as a planet, as a community of intellectuals. And I'll continue to hold the flag for Descartesian skepticism to all the kind of simplistic veracities that are hurled at us. So the scarcity of truth is a huge factor here, and that's why I'm always trying to think up solutions. So my solution to that is a vow of veracity in parliamentary fora around the planet. Politicians by law have to tell the truth, and if they lie, they're forced from office. So I also think the solution has to be education for peace. Our leaders, they were children once, they went to school, they were educated in a system that didn't value peace, that never taught them the words non-violence. Martin Luther King was someone you studied one day in your entire school career in an RE lesson if you're in Britain. They never went into the depth of philosophy of non-violence behind Martin Luther King. Did they know he had a PhD from the University of Boston? Did they know he'd studied old Christian esoteric Gnostic traditions and compared them with Gandhian philosophies and with Hindu non-violence and Buddhist? Did they know the depth of Martin Luther King's work? No, of course not. Very few people do. It's not studied and taught. So when I was at my Jain conference in Delhi, we proposed that every school in the world should have a course running throughout the school year on peace education, non-violence, mediation, giving kids the intellectual wherewithal to deal with conflict in their own lives, like bullying, which goes on in schools. I was one of the pioneers of mediation training in schools. Some of the schools I taught in as head of RE, I would set up a mediation service. Well, I think that should be running in every single school worldwide. We should get kids to realise that violence is not acceptable. And even if it's just beating up, a kid in the playground with a gang, that's not acceptable, and we have to start with the kids who are doing it. Bringing knives into school is not acceptable. Stealing from other kids and then using menaces and threats. All this behaviour, we have young people in school for 7 or 10 years. Well, this is where they need to learn that. Basic ethics, basic morality of non-violence and peace. So I'm with the Jains 100% on that. And they asked me to write the declaration, which I can send you. And we need to keep at this. My colleague, the founder of the Anuvrat movement, Acharya Tulsi, who I met, great Jain sage, really, he said that non-violence will only come about when we adopt the many-sidedness of view, which in Jain philosophy is called anikantavada. It means that I don't know the absolute truth, but then neither does he or she or him. We share our perspectives. We suspend judgment on the absolute veracity, and we share politely and respectfully our various views. We cooperate together for truth, but we will never reach the absolute truth. But Anikantavada is a methodology for non-violence, because it takes away the absolute certainty that my religion is absolutely right and yours is absolutely wrong kind of thinking. Or my political and economic system is absolutely right, yours is absolutely wrong, so I have the right to kind of conquer and colonise and persecute you. Now, Anikantavada takes away from all that, and that was the basis, the metaphysical basis of Jainism, which in turn inspired Piravelis to bring skepticism back from India in about the 3rd century BC when he went travelling there. That's the origin of Western philosophical skepticism, talked about by Cicero, and then rebirthed in the Renaissance and brought up by Descartes and all the others. Richard Popkin has written important intellectual histories of skepticism and goes into all this. But most of them downplay the importance of Jainism, which is a shame. We need to honour the Eastern contributions here. And also in my work as a Druid, the Dharmasya tradition, that is Druidry, was the Jainism of Europe. It was the non-violent tolerance of many views, the pantheon of possible explanations, other gods, and our duty is to just serve the truth, which is the tree of wisdom, the tree of life, if you want. So I published this Encyclopedia of Druid Studies because it's interesting. We don't have Druid Studies. Well, we do now. I've just launched it. We have Jain Studies, Buddhist Studies, Christian Studies, Islamic Studies. Well, now we've got Druid Studies. And it's going to take, a long time for that encyclopedia to filter through. It's 1,000 pages. So, anyway, that's what I've been up to this week. And it's been a, full-on week. I want to finish with a couple of final things, as is my wont. I want to say the other thing that I think this shows up. We have to shut down these bioweapons labs around the world. We have to shut down that kind of thought that that's acceptable science. Science has to become ethical. When I worked with my friend, the late Sir Tom Kibble, who was professor of physics at Imperial College, we worked very closely. He was president of International Scientists for Peace and Global Responsibility, and I was president or coordinator of International Philosophers for Peace. And we met at various conferences, pugwash type events, and often discussed, how scientists and philosophers can collaborate better for peacemaking. And he would be appalled at, the state of the world we're in. He unfortunately died a few years ago. But he was a scientist of very great distinction and caliber. And one of the things we talked about was, shouldn't there be a kind of Hippocratic Oath for scientists? If you train in advanced microbiology and you've got the know-how to make evil weapons of mass destruction, shouldn't you have to take some oath like a doctor saying you won't misuse that knowledge and use it to harm humanity? And shouldn't it only be if you've taken such an oath that you would be able to progress into a scientific career? Kibble and I both agreed on that. I think that you should take such an oath if you're a scientist of any kind, graduating with a doctorate from a university, a bona fide university, anywhere in the world. And it should be like an oath of non-violence. To me, it shouldn't really be necessary to take such an oath. It should just be written into your heart. But unfortunately, academia has become such a cutthroat, monetized climate of competitiveness that, if you can get a job with the MOD making microbes, that's great. I'll get my 100 grand a year and, forget about the ethics. That's why I dreamt up the idea of the nonagon to counter this, the Leonardo da Vinci Peace Prize. We don't want young scientists to have to work for the military industry complex making weapons of mass destruction. We want them to work for peace. So, yes, Sir Tom Kibble and I agreed on that, and I still think it's important, and therefore I think these bioweapons labs should be shut down. They should be purely working on defence and on medical research, how to stop these diseases with vaccines. That's why I think they should all be interviewed. The heads of these things should be published, exposed, and it's time to take these horrible bugs from the stone under which they've all been allowed to fester in communist China, in Russia, in the US and Britain. Enough is enough, folks. This is serious. This is the possible wipeout of humanity. We need to know the truth, and then we need to shut down the possibility of these things leaking. Even if this was a natural leak from, bats, well, we need to shut it down that this never happens as an accident. So I'm going to finish with my saint of the day. My little habit here is to go through and invoke every day the sages and saints of that day, because we need them for protection, right? This is a scary world out there. And these guys are the line managers. They're our pioneers who've gone ahead, so to speak. That's how I see it. And the Christian tradition, which I also